everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of a very strange knife, which is getting pretty unusual these days, and that's your Spyderco Junior here. The Spyderco Junior is now discontinued, unfortunately, but it was originally designed by Alexandru Diaconescu. I'm sure I'm butchering my Romanian there, but it was designed for kids, as a kid's first knife, and the reason being that here it's got this really super prominent finger choil with a heavy blade guard between the blade and the knife. I don't know whether this is a good idea for kids. That ain't my department, but nonetheless, it's an interesting knife, and I figured I'd give it a quick review. Just by way of size comparison, here is your Spyderco Delica and your Spyderco Sleesh Bowie. Yeah, so let's just go ahead and jump on in, as always, to the good, the bad, and the ugly. Oh, first and foremost in the good, the blade shape is very nice, in that it's just pleasant to work with. It's got it's enough belly for food prep, it's got enough tip for, it's a nice blade shape, and it reminds me a lot of your Sleesh Bowie's blade shape, which, no, I'm doing this upside down, but here I go. But either way, it's a very nice little blade shape, no real complaints there. So that's good, and that makes this functionally a good tool. The compression lock, and this is a compression lock folder, so as you recall, the compression lock is kind of like a reverse liner lock, where the bar here pops up behind the knife and then keeps the knife solid. It's a compression lock, so it's rock solid, and this one particularly is very, very, very solid. I'm very happy with the lockup on this, and I do always like the compression lock. That's a good thing. We'll talk about the difference between this and your PM2 compression lock in a little while, but nonetheless, there it is. Ergonomically speaking, this knife is solid. It's not perfect, but it is very solid. It's going to stay in your hand because it's got all of this extra support here, and, there's no real complaints with it. I wish I was a little closer to the blade, but that's kind of the point of it, so I can't begrudge that altogether too much. The blade-to-handle ratio in this knife is pretty great as well, which means, if we look at at the size of this knife overall relative to, say, your Delica, this knife is not particularly larger than your Delica, maybe very, very slightly. But if you compare the blades out, well, there, you're getting a whole lot more blade for your money, or at least for your time, or your space. That's the quantity. Anyways, yeah, so you get a whole bunch of blade from a very small knife, which is kind of a nice thing. I appreciate that. And it's not quite to the level of tie lock where, it's bigger on the inside, but it definitely does feel nice to have that much blade stuck in that handle, which is a beautiful thing. The action is fairly smooth. It's a hydraulic smooth. It's on Teflon washers, and we'll get there. But, it's fairly smooth. I got no real problems with that. The construction on it is very simple, in that it's just some G10 liner, a couple of standoffs, some steel liner, and some G10 and a pocket clip. No real complaints there. And then, honestly, the biggest thing this knife has going for it is it's pretty damn unique. This is a knife that only Spyderco would make, by far. And, it's not bad in any stretch of the imagination. I don't mind this knife at all. So, those are the good things. It's got a great blade shape with a huge blade-to-handle ratio. It's ergonomically solid. It's got a compression lock. And it's simply constructed and built well. So, there you go. Let's jump into the bad. Couple of gripes here. First and foremost, the designer's name is just freaking huge on the side of it, and it's poorly designed in that way. I just don't like this logo at all, and it kind of cheapens the whole effect. Not a big fan of that. But that's a little gripe. Couple of real gripes, though. First and foremost, the scales are very grippy, which is just fine, but it's combined with a very tight pocket clip. And note that this is not a deep carry wire clip like on your Sleesh Bowie here. This is just a plain wire clip. And so it's very, very tight with grippy scales, and that means that this knife is death destroyer of pants. You need to keep this knife away from any pants that are in your vicinity, or it will chew them up. It's not, completely out of line, but it's something you got to keep in mind. The blade steel is fine. It's VG10. And, on a knife that's this unique, generally I prefer a nicer blade steel. But again, it's fine. It's VG10. There's not a big problem. But as these get more expensive, that's something you're going to want to keep in mind. It's easier to pay more money for a better steel. Again, VG10's not bad at all. It's good to go. I'm just complaining because I'm a snob. Let's just be fair. And then, finally, the blade is surprisingly thick, honestly. I don't know why this blade is as thick as it is. For a thickness comparison, here's your Spyderco Delica, which is a much, much thinner blade. Here is your Sleesh Bowie, which is about the same thickness, actually. And, you know, it's just... The thing is, this geometry would make for such an incredible slicer kind of knife, and then they go and put a fairly thick blade on that. That might have been a concession to the whole kid thing. They want a durable knife, but for the purpose for an adult, I would have wanted a thinner blade on here. Not a huge deal, but again, just a little bit of a frustration. Don't see why they went that route. So those are the bad. It's got an ugly logo on it. The destroys pants like nobody's business, and the blade's just a little thicker than it needs to be, and not in a perfect steel. Let's go into the ugly. So the ugly here is exactly one thing, and that's the action because it's running on Teflon washers. Now, Teflon washers can be done fine, but the thing is, generally speaking, they encourage an action which is smooth, but it's a very effortful smooth. In order to move the knife, you need to keep it moving. You need to keep applying effort throughout. It's a smooth effort, and this isn't, mind you, like Shabazz smooth, but it's in that same feeling. It's more of a hydraulic smoothness. And we can compare that to another compression lock from Spyderco, and that's your PM2, which is here in some copper scales, but nonetheless, the action's the same, where if you trigger that compression lock, the blade just falls shut. Or if you trigger the compression lock, you can flick the blade back open. And that's a beautiful part of the compression lock. Because your fingers aren't in the blade path, you can shut it just using gravity. And because they're using these kinds of the Teflon washers and they're going for that hydraulic smoothness, you lose that. If I just trigger the compression lock here, nothing happens. I can try and flick it a little bit, but I can't get it all the way in there. And similarly, although you can... no, you can't really flick it open either. Nope, no doing. And that's just a little disappointing. The compression lock, one of the most joyous things for me on the PM2 is that action on the compression lock. And here we've lost that action for no good reason, and this would be a knife in which it would be so nice. And I can see, again, maybe if you're going for the child market, you don't want something that'll fall shut on them. But I don't know. As an adult, that's a little bit disappointing to me, because I see what could have been. And there you go. So that's the ugly, just the fact that the action is not really what the compression lock deserves. So what's the final verdict on the Spyderco Junior? It's a nice knife. It's got a lot of good things going for it, and for some use cases it could be good. Maybe for a kid. I don't know. I don't have kids. But it might be a decent enough choice for him. It's a very good choice if you're in a situation where you need the ergonomics, you need a big blade in a small package, or you need that finger guard. If you're doing something where you're stabbing in the bags all day and you have a tendency to slip up and go over the blade, this will stop you from doing that. That is just not an option here. But that seems like a pretty unusual use case to me. But overall, like I said, it's ergonomically solid. It's a compression lock, which is solid like crazy. The lockup is great. And, you know, it's got some aesthetic faults. It tears up pockets. The blade is a little thicker than it needs to be. And it's let down by the action, which is just not what I want to see on a compression lock. And I think more than anything, I just feel a little bit of disappointment here. That it could have been such a beautiful knife if it had that kind of fall shut smoothness. But instead, it ends up in kind of an awkward land. And so for me, I don't think this is a keeper. It's a great collector's piece. And, you know, if it seems interesting to you, keep an eye out. But I don't think this one's going to stick around, even though I had some high hopes. I got real high hopes for the Spyderco Ouroboros, which is coming out in a few months here, and that is in a lot of ways a rehashing of this, except less finger guard and more finger choil. But I'm really, really curious to see how that one works. I've got one pre-ordered. You guys will be the first to know about it. But that's your Spyderco Junior. It's a very weird blade. It's unique. I give credit for that. But for me, it's not a gem, and it's probably not something that's sticking around. I hope this has been helpful for you guys, and I want you to have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day.